What the hell is up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Pronago. This is Pr0totype, and up soon is Acropolis #2 next month, and I just wanted to announce that. I'll get into a little bit more details about Acropolis #2, and also in this podcast we will be talking about economic changes, Cornerstone updates, and a bunch of other things that are going to be being adjusted in the next Cosmonarchy release. You can check that out on the pre-release game build if you're looking for that, if you have the fraud launcher set up already, and if you don't, well, check out the link below. It's a modded StarCraft 1 experience, but it's pretty much its own game at this point. Just happens to be using the StarCraft engine. Yeah, I think that's probably a better way to pitch it to some people. Other people might be like, oh, no, I love mods. But then there's the people who don't love mods, and then you're like, nah, dude, check out this new game they built within the StarCraft engine. I don't know, you have to kind of play fast and loose with some of the words there in order to get the right message across to people, because there's going to be some people who just they don't think that mods are all that good. They don't think that they're very interesting, and I can't necessarily blame them for that in the context of maybe they have like a bar of quality that they're after that they already like, and most mods don't reach that. But we do reach that, I would say. We have pretty good quality content, although the quantity of it could definitely be going up and is going to be going up, and also, we have a pretty cool player base, so you can definitely join our Discord server for that stuff. Anyway, shilling aside, the other thing that I can talk about related to shilling is the coffee page in the bottom left if you want to donate to support project development. You could also send in prize pool contributions that way, and, well, wouldn't you know it, that pretty neatly takes us to the very next move that we're going to be talking about here, which is Acropolis #2. That's the subject. We are announcing that Acropolis #2 will be going live on October 26th. And that is when we will have our kickoff for the first phase of the gauntlet. We have $1,000, actually more than $1,000 up for grabs, and we might have significantly more depending on what other donations come in the interim. But that's the bare minimum. So if you win this tournament first place, $500 going into your account, and that's the minimum that you're going to get, and that number may increase as time goes on. I'm still debating whether or not I want to take extra money that gets added in and put that towards the lower placements of the throne room stage, which is our playoffs bracket at the end, all the way at the end. Or if I want to keep making it top heavy, in terms of the prize distribution. But we'll come to that bridge, cross that bridge when we come to it, and that's when more money comes in for that particular purpose. But I do appreciate our donors. Big money donors were Biddy B and Neblime this time around. Actually, Neblime putting in an extra $100 just because somebody, I think it was Jackie Langsky, contributed $100 by proxy by guessing his name correctly. I think that's just because, he must have found access to it, because it's not a name that you would normally expect. It's I don't even think it's an Australian name per se. I think maybe it is. Maybe, I don't know. It's just a name I've never heard of before, but it's cool. It's cool because it's a $100 name right there. So thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. And Acropolis #2 coming soon. So the signups are open on our Discord server. Check that out. Head on over to the CM Tournaments channel in our Discord server, and you can see the pinned message there with a link and everything that you need as far as information is concerned. As of recording, a few hours after opening up signups, we have exclusively Protoss players signed up. I'll double check the signups real quick just in case I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that is indeed all that we have for the time being. Yeah, so it's pure Protoss. Veek is going to sign up and participate, but he is playing as Protoss. So is he really going to sign up? Is he really there if he's playing as Protoss? I mean, Protoss, a nerf toss, etc., etc. But I've been building out the perspective bracket for this one. And, just as another word of warning almost, is I built up a list of players that might actually show up as far as the players who might qualify, the players who are returning. So far, we've confirmed that Neblime, the Shambler, and Hamster are all returning. Hapsea also has an invite. I don't know if he'll accept it or not. He did express some interest in joining the open qualifier and playing himself back into form that way. We'll see if that's something that he wants to do. That being said, regardless of whether or not he shows up, we know Neblime, the Shambler, and Hamster are going to be there. And then we expect that the players who will qualify through the gauntlet stage are going to include HitEmUp, Top Ramen, Mystery Meat, probably Veek 7, Gerald Storm, Shopkeeper Dog, Aoud and Ecalypso, if they decide to make their return. Ecalypso already started playing again. Smarty Cakes could be in there, right? That would take us up to 12 players. Oh no, I guess that's considered 12 players right there. And I'm also interested in potentially opening it up so that we have 6 groups instead of 4, which would mean that we need to qualify much larger numbers of players, we might need like a third stage of the gauntlet instead of just 2 stages at that point. But we will see, because there is actually a pretty big gap between the gauntlet stage starting and the next phase of a competition, which is the battlement stage. So we do have plenty of time to actually schedule in additional like stuff if we need to have another qualifier, right? So you know, that's how it's working for me. That's it makes total sense to me. We'll see how it actually works out at the end of the day. So if you're not available exactly on the 26th, don't worry, because there's going to be at least by minimum a second qualifier. The first qualifier is open up on the 26th. We might open up a third one depending on interest, signups, etc. We'll see how it goes. I would love to just outright commit. I'm very tempted to just outright commit to doing 6 groups, but we'll save that, because I want to see, you know, basically what's the caliber of player at that point, right? Because there's other names that I didn't list off that could potentially go in. There's 3Crow, and there's Biddy B, and Benno, Jujic, a couple of other people who have already, some of those have already signed up actually for the tournament. So there's definitely names like that. Then there's like the names that maybe you go a step further, maybe haven't been playing as actively lately, like the Night Fox, but I would throw him in the hat for sure, as well as the potential to get in there. And you know, there's a bunch of people. I actually reached out to a few people who played Cosmonarchy back in the day, and have yet to make a tournament debut per se or whatever, but they might be aware of it, or they might want to try it out again now that the economy is a bit different, stuff like that. So. Yeah, I think I'll probably end up spending some time reaching out to more people. I did a lot of shilling today, but I also got to shout out some shills that we've got here. We've got HitEmUp shilling. We've got Luciferius, the shill master, guy who's been shilling for a very long time. And we've got Bariso, all shilling, all shill maxing. And I do appreciate that, because as much as I call it shilling, and that's almost like, that's obviously taken as a bit of a pejorative in most circles, I gotta say, having more distinct voices that are embedded within the space, that play often, that experience the content, that are here to follow around and enjoy the parts of the community and stuff, who then go around to other parts that they are, attached to per se, and are interested in playing, and interested in, like, spreading the word in or whatever. Like, that is actually really useful, because the more like unique people are actually playing the game and then also trying to provide, shills, basically spreading the word for the game, that's very helpful for outreach in general. If it definitely, like, I'm trying to divorce the sort of cynical marketing angle from the more organic word of mouth angle, but it is essentially word of mouth. Like, when you decide to go in and start shill maxing, you are basically saying, I'm part of this community. I think it's really epic. You guys should join. Look at this cool event that's coming up. And that's like quintessential word of mouth. I'm not paying anybody to do that. There's no perks that you get in exchange. There's no quid pro quo where I'm like, yeah, hit him up, I'm going to buff the Atreus, just shill some more people. That's definitely not the case. But there's things like that, right? Where we get a little bit more attention from people who are popping in and doing some shilling and all that stuff, and spreading the word in that way, more neutrally saying. And yeah, I just like that. I like the fact that we're able to sort of get people, they tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends, that sort of concept being applied. So we're only like maybe 5 users away from having 600 users in our Discord server, for example. Obviously you don't, there's some of those numbers are going to be fugazi because there's like inactive accounts or whatever, but it's still pretty cool that we've been seeing a steady influx. It's a drip feed, but a steady influx of people coming in. I definitely feel like a bunch of people have joined on account of a number of the people who have been like that I just name dropped, right? Like, I know HitEmUp has spread the awareness a lot. I know Bariso's been talking to people who are in the Spanish speaking scene. And I know that there's others out there too that talk more in like the Russian speaking scene. We've got a lot of active Russian speakers, be they Russian or Ukrainian or some other place. And yeah, it's pretty cool to see that sort of stuff in action. Anyway, so I wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to those people, because I am not the only one shilling Acropolis #2, talking about how it's $1,000. That's a big number, but that number could get bigger as well, and that could be really exciting. But beyond that, it's really cool to be able to say, and I really do appreciate the people who have put in their money, put in their time, put in their shilling. Because that is really what makes the difference, right? We're talking about $1,000. I've never been able to say I have that much money for a tournament. I feel like we were excited because we almost hit $500 on one of the other tournaments. I think it was the first Acropolis, right? It was like, maybe it did hit 500. I don't remember, but like we're over double that. I think I'm pretty well. Yeah, definitely. Because I'm factoring in some of the prize money that came in from the, from playing the the qualifiers. So the way that it works is the gauntlet stage is split up into at least two, maybe three separate qualifiers. And if you qualify through the upper bracket in there, I was going to give you 25. And if you qualify through the lower bracket, I was going to give you 15. But I think it actually makes more sense to make it so that if you qualify in the first gauntlet, that's where the most of the prize money is. And that makes sense because that's probably where all of the heavy hitters are going to play. Like I'm expecting, for example, HitEmUp, Top Ramen, Arbuz, Budesh, and Mystery Meat, as an example, all of them to be in the first gauntlet. And they would be favorites to make it out if they were they're probably the top 4 dogs, right? Like if Ayud comes back, he could definitely steal a spot from one of those people. If one of the other guys like Gerald Storm or Shopkeeper Dog gets in there faster or whatever, that could be a big deal for sure. But anyway, I look at that and I think, okay, yeah, we're cooking with gas here. We're talking about some pretty cool stuff. And if you make it through that first qualifier, that first part of the gauntlet, like that, your first opportunity to qualify, you make it. I think that's probably where you should get the lump sum money, like $25. And then, the second qualifier is 15. And then maybe the third qualifier is only 10 or 5 or something, some pittance, or maybe it just doesn't have any prize money at all because it's like, no, what you did was you earned a spot in the tournament at the last possible second. So like that's your reward already. Right. And so I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud about some of that format stuff, but it's pretty exciting to think about, just the fact that we have that. We did technically have that for Acropolis number 1. I had set aside $100 out of the Biddy Bee sponsorship thing going on, and I made sure to include that. By the way, since Neblim's put in $600 of his own money into the prize pool, I should probably ask him about if I'm supposed to advertise something for him. I don't think he has a business though, so it's not really the same thing. I guess I'll just have to start stamping, making sign postages with the Neblime avatar that the AI generated, Lemon Man or whatever, and put that into the game as like an art piece, and then be able to post it in different spots on the maps or whatever. But that's the only thing I can really think of at this point. But anyway, pretty cool stuff all in all. I'm definitely excited to see what happens when we spend a little bit more time with with the game in its current economic state. And that's obviously the next thing that I want to talk about here, is that we have made some changes to the economy. We are making changes to other things. We've already made some changes to the cornerstones and stuff, targeting things that are trying to basically correct some issues that we perceive in the game. That, yes, the old version of Cosmonarchy, right, the version that Tyrant's Tale was played on, it had some very cool aspects to it. I don't want to start revising history and saying I didn't like at all what the old version was. But I see a better path, essentially a path to something that is better. And so I'm just, we're improving it. And I say because I'm making that executive decision to go forward on it. But a lot of these ideas were not originally my ideas, or maybe I had an idea of the problem, but the solution that we wound up in was only reached by conversation with many other people, especially, of course, Veek7, my homie, who has, again, like I said, signed up to that qualifier. So yeah, now that we've talked about the biggest competition that's coming, I want to talk a little bit about the economic changes that are also coming to Cosmonarchy. So I say we move on directly into that little area and talk about that. So the new economy in Cosmonarchy is, it's funny because we've got the most, the tournament with the most money, but the game itself is a little bit, I would say, like, the economy obviously being changed makes you think, like, whoa, wait, do I have more money in the game, though? And actually, the changes that we ended up going for the economy, again, for those who missed the brief explanation in the previous podcast, we observed an issue where our worker counts were very high in the mid to late game of most matches, but army counts were not very high. And that started to change a little bit for Zerg specifically in like one base scenarios. But that was the other issue we noticed, is that, there would be one basing a lot more often than we would want. And we want to aim for like a more, for 2 base, 3 base, etc., being a little bit more commonplace, right? Being maybe the default that you would expect. And I feel like so far, a mixture of changes to the map pool and also changes to how the economy works have pushed us in that better direction over on the pre-release game build. I've seen a lot of games, and we've been casting a lot of matches onto the channel. So if you've missed those, I definitely recommend checking that out. But one of the things that I would say about the way that the game's economy has shifted is that we are reintegrating a little bit more of that, availability for that faster expansion timing. And the reason, or the manner that which we've done that, is we've added more value to the first and second worker on the minerals. and on the gas as well, like on any resource node, the first and second worker are a bit more efficient than they were on the previous version. But the third worker is significantly less efficient. It's only at 25% of efficiency, whereas previously it was at 50% efficiency. So that does make a pretty big difference, because it basically means that your third worker is less valuable. You would much rather, by a significant factor now, transfer that third worker to a new base, and therefore you are further incentivized to building less workers overall, but more bases. The other thing that really helps with the worker count is that once you hit depletion, you are at full saturation at 2 workers, and your second worker is 25% efficient. So what that means is your third worker is 0%. It's utterly useless on that patch, besides the fact that, I mean, I guess if you survive some worker harassment, you lose like half your workers, well, you'll still have some oversaturated or whatever. But in that situation, depleted minerals become a pretty significant decrease in terms of the workers that you want to have there, and obviously a decrease in yield, which was a different problem that I personally observed. I don't think Veek was as he took as much notice or took as much truck with it. Like he wasn't as upset with it as I was, but I really thought it was a problem that when you would deplete your base, you went from originally we were doing 4 minerals to 2 minerals, and that half cut in efficiency I felt was actually a good thing, because what it led to was your bases, it did force you to basically expand, and more so in the mid game. It didn't really target for, the first expansion. The natural expansion was valuable for other reasons, mostly actually because of your Vespene. You weren't as heavily, like you had plenty of minerals, but not much gas, right? If you're thinking about the old eco and stuff. And then at some point, depletion was 3 instead of 2. So you only lost 1 mineral per return, but you still preserved the same amount of value from workers in terms of efficiency, right? In terms of mining efficiency. So yeah, you would get less money, but it wasn't noticeably less, and not as noticeable as obviously a 50% cut. And it also was not as significant when it came to the worker stuff. Like, yes, you would rather have more workers on a base that wasn't depleted, but the depletion cut didn't hurt that much, and your worker efficiency wasn't affected. Now, the depletion cut does hit you economically, and the workers are in excess, right? Like, if you have 3 workers per node, and the nodes deplete, then suddenly say it's a 7 mineral base, well, you've got 7 workers that are doing nothing that should be moved to another base, right? So that's one of the examples in how we've decided to combat the worker counts by making it so that third worker is not as useful in any stage of the game, and absolutely not useful when you have depleted minerals in effect. And minerals do not regenerate. We are thinking about doing something to the minerals after a certain point, or maybe allowing players to do something to them that will refuel them at some point. But we're going to wait until, that's going to require some new tech anyway. So there's a technical cost associated with implementing something like that. We don't even have the concepts that we would necessarily want for that. Like, one of the ideas that was kind of low impact, right, in terms of a technical implementation would be like, after 3 minutes of not being harvested, they start regenerating, and maybe it would be after 1 minute, and maybe that regeneration would be fairly slow, something like that, right? And so that over the course of, say, 10 minutes, you've gotten back up to like half of of what they were at the start, right? And maybe they only go up to half. Maybe they don't go all the way up to 1500. Maybe they stop at 750. And the reason why that is significant is that way they're never at peak efficiency, peak value. They never get back to where they were at the start of the game, because most mineral fields start off with 1500 in the resource container value. But when it comes to like super late game scenarios, if you've destroyed a base and you can stop your opponent from taking it or whatever, then it will eventually regain some value. Maybe it just regenerating to 250 is enough to still make it valuable. I'm not really 100% sure. I'd have to do some, calculations and also some thinking. And obviously that would, it would still be valid if you pulled your workers away from the node. It's not like it detects a town center and is like, I refuse to regenerate. It's just if they've been mined recently, right? So that's all you would need to think about. And we already have some stuff in the game that would allow us to do that. So technically that would not be difficult to implement. But these are some other thoughts that we're having, right? Is like, we don't want to throw scale out. In fact, actually, I think this has been a way to turbocharge the scale in the early game, which is a separate thing that we're also thinking about trying to resolve, is that you have more income earlier now. So like you get to the same point income wise that you had in the previous meta, the Tyrant's Tail game build, right? The release game build currently as of the time of recording. you get to that point faster, and that's why you need less workers. But like in a conjunction with that, we've also removed the ability to train additional workers from worker queues. So the quarry now makes the Talos exclusively, but does not require the Atlas. So you don't need to tech up in order to get that. And the embassy now makes the artisan, but not the scribe. So that's an exclusive thing as well. And the Larvosk has been increased in cost a little bit, but also the larva spawn rate has been increased to 14 seconds from 12 seconds. And so Zerg can still power, but they also generally have a problem competing at even efficiency anyway. So for Zerg, and I've talked about this in the castovers, it's kind of our vision that Zerg is at least a little bit, like maybe 20% or 10%, like less cost efficient, to the point where they would need at least that many that percentage more in worker count or in income in order to be trading evenly with their opponent. And so if you want to win, then maybe you need like 30% more workers or 30% more income or something, right? And so like the onus is on you to expand further, because you can make more workers and you can expand easier by 50 minerals and a significant time cost, actually, a significant tempo advantage. So yeah, there's definitely some action there, I would say. So that has been some of the economic changes that we've made. I would work the larva ones in. I'd lump that in with the changes to economy, because it does impact how heavy Zerg can like power on worker count. But yeah, I think it's very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot in flux. People are still trying to figure out the meta. HitEmUp is still winning with every race and just absolutely demolishing people. I guess another thing that we can talk a little bit about is actually the Cornerstone changes. So one of the cornerstones that changed, actually, I want to say the only cornerstone for Protoss that did not change was Tyranny of the Sun. And that is to say Divine Mandate, which is the cornerstone that allows them to not have tech requirements, has changed. So now they have, instead of having no tech requirements, they have far more flexible tech requirements than that of other races. Tech is unlocked on now a per tier basis, which means if you have a gateway and or a lattice, so a gateway or a lattice or an embassy will unlock tier 2. And that means that if you go gateway into, say you build a gateway, then you can make grand libraries, rogue galleries, ardent authorities, and stargates. Once you get one of those tier 2 structures, you'll get access to the prostration stage, the unitary union when it's implemented, the argosy. Once you make one of those 3 structures, you'll get access to the ancestral archives, the synthetic synod, and the monument of sin. So just to throw those names at you, if you don't familiar with Protoss and Cosmonarchy, that's not going to mean anything to you. But basically, before, you could make anything at any time. And for example, the economy changes, plus the fact that you can make anything at any time, meant that, for example, HitEmUp was building Stargate openers, and he was just running amok with Aurora spams. And it was just pretty funny to see. So I that was one of the reasons why we weren't changing the Cornerstone because HitEmUp was too powerful. We were changing it actually as he himself said that maybe Protoss is busted in this way because of that. But for a long time, we've actually, for those who don't know, before HitEmUp even came to the server, we have been battling with the Protoss tech progression, or I guess lack thereof, for a while. Like Veek7 and myself have been thinking about it, not necessarily super satisfied with it. And the reason why we were thinking about it and being like that is because, well, we wanted the tech progression to be a little bit more involved and maybe incorporated a bit more into the pylons. And, there was this pitch that I had where like scribes would turn into the pylons, and that way you still need a worker for expanding, because instead of warping in structures from the scribe, you do it so from the pylon. And, there's a bunch of ideas like that would allow you to project power in different locations and all this other stuff, right? And I think that could be kind of interesting, but regardless, that was a heavy tech cost that had a high tech cost associated with it if you wanted to make it so that it worked in that fashion, right? And so, yeah, that's just one of those things where when you're thinking about trying to build a game, you think about like, how do I implement some of these ideas? Yeah, it would be great if those ideas were easy to implement on a technical level, but that was not the case for this particular one. But even beyond that, maybe that wouldn't have even been the best move. Like I think Veek7 had pushed back on the scribe turning into pylon thing probably on account of UX, if I had to guess, but I just remember him saying something about that. There was definitely some people who weren't as excited about something like that, and that's totally fair game. I will also mention that when it came to things like the the AI. Like, the AI was also a concern. Like, how do we make it so that the computer opponent makes the structures correctly and recognizes the tech requirements and stuff if the pylons upgrade into new pylon versions or whatever, and that's what allows you to train units from them and stuff. And so yeah, it would have been a very complicated system to implement, and also maybe too complicated for the player to parse. And all of that is potentially true. But the point I'm getting at is we've kind of for a long while thought, well, the current system is okay, but it would be nice if we had something better. And I don't know that this system is all that much better, but I do think it fixes the problem of not really knowing what the Protoss is doing. And, now there's value in scouting them, because if you see multiple tier 1 structures being placed down, you can be somewhat comfortable knowing that they're probably going to stick to tier 1 for a bit. But if you only see one gateway and nothing else, you can expect that they're probably saving up for some tier 2 option, especially if they've already put down their Nexus at their expansion or whatever. So these are just some thoughts that I have about that. The other cornerstones that changed for Protoss were flash shielding, which now it starts at 10 points per second still, but it falls to 2 points per second after over the time of 5 seconds. So at the end of 5 seconds, they're going to be regenerating at only 2 per second. And that's a lot of seconds and math, but basically what it means is that the burst of shields that you get back starts shortly after they take damage, and then stay away from damage for a little bit. And then the change basically kicks in so that if you're regenerating 100 shields, it's going to take much longer than if you're regenerating only 10 shields. So that rewards better micro, and it also gives you a little bit more time to fight Protoss units in the long run, even if they've been pulled back. Like, it's going to be a while from if you've depleted all of the shields on a Drakodin, it's going to be something like maybe 4 or 5 seconds before they're fully regenerated, instead of, well, I guess it would be more than that by a significant margin thinking about it, because it was 4 seconds on the old patch. So that's one example of a cornerstone that did change pretty significantly to add more counterplay to Protoss when it comes to those kinds of compositions. Then there's Vengeful Ascension, which got buffed pretty significantly by going from a 25% increase in movement speed and attack speed to a 33% increase. The other option that we will eventually potentially exercise is making it so that it actually stacks up to a certain cap or something, where like that way you get a bonus or a benefit from, say, 5 vassals going down instead of only 1 at any given time. Where you currently want to space them out because there's no benefit to having multiple instances of it. Whereas maybe what could happen is that they stack up, but they fall off independently of each other. Or maybe what could happen is that the increased stacks just add duration. So like the first proc is like 2 seconds, like it currently is, and then each subsequent stack adds 1 second or something like that, right? So that could be kind of interesting to try to play around with that, because it just means that you'd have the buff for longer, which means you'd be able to get more efficiency out of it. But that's it for Protoss Cornerstone changes. Obviously the Zerg changes, I talked about how the it's not really, it should probably be a cornerstone because it's pretty significant to them. The larva, I guess you could technically say Kagregenesis is the cornerstone for that. That is a case where the larva spawn rate went up, right? Or it went down, I guess. The time between larva went up. So there's that. And I think there was, the cornerstone change for Tyrant was actually Masters of None, which is basically like what happens when you deploy a unit. That's what that idea is. You deploy into alternative modes to specialize their capabilities. When you unload a unit, it has to play its deployment animation if it's deployed. And so you unload a sieged phalanx in particular, then they will have to play their deployment animation. This has a significant impact on Matadors. Well, not super significant, but it's still like somewhat significant that you get a little bit of a wind-up, although their animation should be a bit more involved because it's currently very fast. I'll say that much. And then, besides that, I think that's it for the Cornerstone changes, but I felt like those were pretty important to note because obviously Cornerstones impact how the race plays with many of its units, in some cases all of its units, like the Flash Shielding one. So I figured I would throw that in, but Protoss got the most significant changes there. I think the Flash Shielding thing is fair, especially when you factor it in with the buffs to a couple of other things, and obviously the fact that they can more liberally make use of some of their gas heavy compositions. We're still trying to figure out if, how good some of those units are. As a general note, as we get into some of the other changes that I would like to make about the game and the other things that I want to try to make sure that I do properly, there has been some people who have, if they've been playing a lot of multiplayer and they're not really being able to find too much 1v1 success, one of the things that they'll often say is, oh, my units don't feel very good, or they'll express some frustration with that, where they don't feel like they have too many powerful units for whatever reason. And I'm sure some people will encourage me to say, oh, that's probably just a skill issue. But I would like the units to feel strong for everybody. I'd like there to be units which feel really powerful. I think every unit should feel potent in the right situation. And the only question is, how many situations are the right situation for this unit? Is it a generalist? Is it a unit that excels in common cases? Is it a more specialized unit? And so if there are units out there, say like you are, for example, a Tyrant player, and you really don't think that like Goliaths feel very good. Well, I buffed Goliaths in this patch. I made it so that they have +1 anti-air range, but they have less anti-ground range. However, that isn't going to encourage them to be on the front lines. And it also increases their DPS in general, as long as you're not kiting. So I feel like it feeds into a lot of the compositional thematics that you would normally get out of Terran. I'm thinking about the phalanx. Does the projectile miss too often for the unit to feel powerful, or like it does what it's supposed to do? Well, maybe then the projectile speed will increase. I increased the ancial sight range so that you can combat eidolons in TVT a little bit easier from that. That's like a more very specific case, but it's still worth pointing out. The other stuff that changed was, yes, we did see some nerfs to the eidolon in terms of its attack speed, but the gas... the increase in efficiency of gas mining compared to what it was before means that you can make a lot more eidolons. So I think they're still meta. They're certainly still good. The question of whether or not they will be defeated by anything is yet to be determined. But people were thinking initially that meant that was the end of the eidolon meta. I don't know if I'm not so confident. And yeah, generally speaking, when you have a situation like, this race has like a lot of powerful units, or it feels very powerful. Like I know Protoss think Terran is powerful, and Terran thinks Protoss is powerful, and Zerg thinks everybody is powerful. And, these are the kinds of things where I want to make sure that the units feel good to use, feel strong, and in certain situations that are healthy for the game and that are appropriate to what the unit's design is. I'm watching those kinds of reports. I'm watching that kind of discussion. It does make it to me. Especially if if I'm actively talking about something in the server and somebody else responds to me or says something around me, I'm obviously reading that. So, I'm trying to be pretty attentive with that sort of thing. Obviously, I'm kind of busy on the post-move world, but we're getting there. We're getting back into it. Obviously, the prototypes are coming thick and fast, so at least there's that. The castovers are back. There's a lot of good things about that. But I just wanted to throw in a quick word on the fact that one of the things that I definitely want to make sure I do is I make a game where the units are fun to use and the power fantasy is intact. And so, still working on that, but bear with us on the new unit implementations, and definitely we'll talk a little bit more about that actually as the answer to one of the coffee questions, believe it or not. Check that out, I suppose. Generally speaking, I would say I want there to be a little bit more skirmishing in the early stages of the game, and I think that is partially achieved by making it so that faster expansions happen, because then you have less money spent on military super early, unless you're specifically trying to do something that's more military focused in the early game. When we removed supply, and to a lesser extent when we removed things like upgrades and researches, but I think, and tech requirements, like if you think about it, we don't really have like an academy equivalent anymore for any race besides Zerg, right? So we don't have it for Terran, we don't have a cybernetics core equivalent for Protoss. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is that when we removed some of this stuff, it meant that you were pretty much now in Cosmonarchy, you're making, like, what are the kinds of structure purchases that you're building, right? You're building stuff related to your economy. So that would be like add-ons or structures that train additional workers, obviously expand town centers themselves, gas caps, that sort of stuff. And obviously we delay gas capping as a separate point. So that's another thing that only comes in later on in the game. You are making occasionally like some tech purchases. Obviously there's going to be like the tech nodes that are kind of concentrated in that respect. You are taking an opportunity to buy military production structures, and you're also sometimes making static defense. So these are examples of the structures types that those are the kinds of purchases you'll make, right? So broadly speaking, it's like macroeconomic infrastructure, which would be like gas caps, town centers, add-ons for like the quarry add-on, stuff like that. Military purchases, so that's like for the factories, static defense, right? And occasionally tech, right? And so those are like the four things you're making, whereas tech used to be a little bit more ubiquitous or a little bit more common. than it was. Obviously, supply was like a big fifth pillar that is no longer exists in StarCraft or in Cosmonarchy. And that also means that you're not really making walls as much with the same kinds of things that you used to, right? And so, anyway, I wanted to bring all those up because it's not lost on me that you're jumping to higher military counts in part because we don't actually have something that you previously had to spend some of your money on just so that you could make more units. I don't like that was a thing. Obviously, we removed it for a reason, but the side effect of not having something else to spend money on does kind of mean that you have to think about maybe like as a bold proclamation that I'm not necessarily saying we're going to do, based on the fact that you used to have to make supply depots every so often for Terran. Maybe the stockade costing 175 minerals instead of 150 would make sense. Like maybe you would inflate the cost of the production structures to try to make up for the fact that you are no longer building supply. And I also remember I mentioned that in the case of Immortal, Gates of Pyre, I believe that one of the things that they did, and I haven't followed development for that game, so I have no idea what it is like now. But at some point, I read that they made it so that supply was tied to your factory. And I don't think that this does the same thing that I'm talking about, but it kind of makes it so that like you are forced to build more production at some point instead of continuing to produce off of like 2 stockades in the case of Cosmonarchy, a very large army. Now, I don't think that's a huge problem in Cosmonarchy. Like, I don't think that's a problem at all, actually, because you're going to get outproduced anyway. So the currency by which you are judged is a little bit different, right? The metric by which you're judging your performance is a little bit different. So there's no need for supply to be tied to the production. But it's kind of a similar sort of idea where you're tying in the cost of supply to the factory itself. So like I would assume that maybe their military production structures might cost more than you might see in another game because they're also the supply. In Cosmonarchy, there is no supply, but we also did not inflate the cost of production structures. Therefore, the pace of acquisition is still a little bit different. And even then, there is something a little bit more superior about if you were going to have supply, being able to fragment it out into 2 separate purchases of factory and supply structure means that you have to make 2 separate purchases at 2 different times in the game. Thus, your multitasking is going to be a bit different. It's going to be tested a bit more. And you're a little bit more free with like where you decide to place those things. Like there's a bunch of things that get activated by them being 2 separate positions and 2 separate purchases that don't get activated otherwise. So we are aware at the No Frauds Club about Cosmonarchy that we don't have as many infrastructure-based purchases. This has been a topic of conversation continuously, but I would say increasingly so over the last few months, and especially over the last month, since we've been targeting like significant changes to like the economy and stuff that we covered in earlier stages of this show. So I wanted to bring that up because I think it's worth pointing out that these are things that we want to achieve. We want to achieve maybe a slower ramp-up time to larger armies, but still having the support for very large armies in the mid-game and late game. We want to achieve more skirmishing, more fights with smaller unit counts that can help swing a fight and maybe swing a match, but aren't necessarily going to finish the game all unto themselves. Something like what Brood War has when it comes to the early game skirmishes and stuff, but ideally without like the crippling potential for game breaking and game ending damage, where it's like, oh, you've got 4 Zerglings in your main as Protoss. Well, enjoy not being able to mine at full efficiency ever. That's the kind of thing that maybe we don't necessarily want it to be like, and that's why we've increased worker health pools, right? As an example. So I'm putting all of that out on, sort of throwing that all out for you guys to take a look at, because it's my opinion that there should probably be more back and forth and a little bit more opportunity to build things that are not directly related to your military, but not entirely unrelated to it. And that's very vague, but that's basically what supply was, right? So we missed out on that, on supply. We don't have it. The only thing that I'm personally missing is the fact that sometimes you buy something that isn't related to producing more units directly by like it being a production structure, and you also it somehow gives you some other benefit, right? And we're not going to re-add upgrades. We're not going to re-add structures that are requirements for like, oh yeah, you need this structure in order to make the other 2 units on your structure. That doesn't make any sense. Like Terran has a pretty good split because they've got add-ons. I think that they're actually pretty solid in that respect. However, when it comes to the setup that we've got going on for, say, Protoss, it feels a lot more powerful, but maybe not in a way that's so straightforward that when you finish a gateway, you get 5 units. And it's like, Like, what can we realistically do about that? Like, how could we possibly even change that? Like, would it mean we could do something kind of funny, where we do something like, hey, I want like the first time you make a gateway, you can make zealots and Dracodons and maybe ecclesiasts, right? And then you need a second gateway in order to make hierophants and legionnaires. I don't know if that's actually a good thing. That's just like a wild idea that came to my head. Is like double up on your production in order to upgrade your tech. And then obviously if you're making like extra gateways, it's not like after a second gateway, it doesn't really give you anything. But like that, I don't know, that could be an interesting idea. Or maybe it could be like tying it into the tier 2 stuff that maybe there's some units that you only get access to on your gateway once you make a tier 2 structure. Because the tier 1 structure for the gateway, it is the gateway is a tier 1 structure. It unlocks the tier 2 stuff. Once you make tier 2, that doubles back to upgrade your gateway in some way to allow your gateways and your lattices to make like the advanced structure, the advanced stuff there. That's another option. Maybe that's a little bit more believable that we could conceivably do that. And so I don't necessarily want to like enforce the synergies of like, I wouldn't, for example, say, you must make a grand library to train hierophants. It would be, you need an advanced warp, which is like the code for tier 2 structure for a hierophant. But that could be kind of interesting to think about. Like maybe the artisan still requires that tier 2 structure as well, but the embassy gets a price cost cut or whatever a little bit so that you can make like envoys and witnesses earlier in the game. And we can move the embassy to tier 1 on the website, right? Like I have to do that anyway, actually thinking about it, because it's technically a tier 1 structure and it unlocks other stuff, right? So there is that as well. But yeah, these are things that I think are worth pointing out as like potential ideas for the Protoss that would be kind of related and similar to how the Terran works. There's also a problem, I think, and I'm not sure that we can resolve this, but while we're talking about troubles or problems that I think we have, it might be worthwhile to put down the idea of, for example, in the Terran case, when they make an atlas, they have to make all new units and structures in order to make use of the things that are related to that acquisition. So once the atlas comes out, you can then make captaincies, mantles, and starports. But until then, it's not like you can build the structures in advance for a timing, and it's not like they unlock anything from the tier 1 facilities. And I think gating the tier 1 facility, like, I don't think there's any unit that you should not be allowed to make from the stockade or fulcrum until you have, or indeed the starpad, until you have an atlas. I don't think there's any unit like that. And I don't think there's room in tier 1 for Terran for there to be more units added so that they could fit that bill. But I'm just sort of pointing that out as like, yeah, this is like an interesting idea. Like, I guess one of the things that we could think about doing is making it so that like, I don't even know what we would do for this, because again, it would probably involve adding new units, and the Terran roster is pretty big as it is. It's the most Terran is the most implemented units out of all of the races, so the highest like implemented unit count. But like one of the ideas that just came to me was that like once you hit Atlas, like the Stockade and Fulcrum could gain access to like one new unit. Like I was just thinking of like a world where you can make Striga out of the stockades. Shambler suggested, and I don't know if somebody else suggested this before because I feel like it's a proposal I've read before, but the Shambler on the last episode of Prototype suggested that you need the add-ons for the vestry and the scrapyard in the early stages of the game in order to make, for example, your sorry, I said vestry and scrapyard. What I meant is stockade and fulcrum. You need the stockade and fulcrum add-ons to make those additional units. But if you have the atlas, you don't need them anymore. So like units are available without an add-on once you have the atlas, but only at that tier. So like once you make a captaincy, you still need the Tinkerer's Tower and the Guild Hall to train, sirens, strigas, autocrats, and Olympians. But once you hit the data tech, your bear captaincies can also do that. And that would also let you, like, in theory, that opens up some build space, right? You can, and it's maybe a bit of a risk. You can make your Atlas, detonate all of your add-ons so you have more build space. And then if your Atlas gets sniped, you got to rebuild those bad boys in order to keep producing the units you're trying to make. So that's kind of interesting too. There is a potential for that. I do think normally I would say that's too clunky because you're spending a bunch of money on stuff that's like purely for timing, and then you get rid of it after and it's not as useful. Kind of like how Zerg has the tech node evolutions they can do, where you can go from, say, you can go from pool to pond, right? Quasith pool to Vornath pond, so that you can get Vorvs and Nathrakors in the early stages of the game. Or if you went like a den opening, which isn't super common right now, but is a possibility according to HitEmUp, you could then make a pool and then go straight to the Calculator Lake if you're making your pool after tier 2. Or if you made your pool really late and you didn't need Naths and Vorvs, then you can like wait and then go straight to the Calculator Lake and skip the pond entirely. Like that's a thing you can do as Zerg. So that's kind of like a version of that for the Terrans, which, it's kind of interesting. I guess it adds a little bit of like the one thing that's a little bit annoying or odd about the Protoss case is that like when you look at the thing that we just did for the tech, we made it so that the gateway, the lattice, or the embassy all work as options for when you're building tier 2. Like as soon as you have one of those, you can make tier 2. So when you see a gateway that they can make tier 2 stuff. But you don't necessarily know once you snipe that gateway that tier 2 is gone for them and they don't have access to it anymore. And I'm thinking maybe what we would want to do is somehow visually change like the color of the pylons, maybe like all pylons get a different color or like a sprite change or whatever when any tier 1 structure is placed. And that like basically the pylons change their sprite, their model or whatever is modified in some way based on what the what tier their stuff is at. And I guess the same would be true for the Crucible. It would have to be true as well. Like the Crucible, maybe it could just be animation speed, although I think an actual change in the sprite would be good too. So when you see the Crucible, then you know that like, oh, okay, tier 2 is done. But they have access to tier 3 stuff. But do they have access to tier 4 stuff? I don't know. The Crucible has to change color in that sense or whatever. And then, like there would only... that's just like one example, right? So I'm getting at that as like an idea because that way there's a visual indication of the tier. I think there would be a similar issue with like, oh, the Atlas is done, but do we know that as the player? Like, you should probably see a Stockade, Fulcrum, or Starpad change. I guess the Starpad doesn't get factored into this. The Stockade and Fulcrum should change visually to indicate, oh yeah, we've got a higher tier, like the Atlas is done. So like and it would have to be something that makes sense to change on it. Instead of like every Fulcrum suddenly gaining an extra moving part or something, it would have to be like, something about the animation to change, maybe like the color changes in some area when it's producing, stuff like that. And I don't know, like there's things like that I think would be cool visual tells. Anyway, these are just ideas. We're trying to think about like essentially how to make it so that there's more spending on more things than there was before. And I feel like that's valuable. So I'm leaving it at that for now. And we get to work on a little bit of conversation about the Tyrant's Tale mission pack. So let's talk about that as our next topic. So I just wanted to throw this in here towards the end of the regularly scheduled programming before we get to the community roundup and the coffee questions. Tyrant's Tale's mission pack has been started in terms of its development. It will be a series of missions where we follow the dramatized arc of a number of the players that play. So we're going to do the top 4 is our current planning. So HitEmUp, Top Ramen, Neblime, and Arbuz Budesh. So I think it was something like 17 missions was going to be in total. Obviously, we'll just take a piecemeal, right? And we're going to be basing it off of like modified versions of the 1v1 maps anyway. So the first match, for example, will be like HitEmUp versus VK7, right? That was like the quarterfinal number 1. And so that's the first part of HitEmUp's arc. And so that'll be, TVZ, where you HitEmUp. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do the format for like whether you can play as the other guy, but I'm pretty sure you'll be playing as HitEmUp, and he'll be like, the characters will be voiced by the players themselves, unless they don't want to do voice acting. Like I think Arbuz doesn't, he might not have a microphone or something like that. So he might not do himself, and maybe I'll just find some other people who can speak in a Greek accent, or, there's always AI. So we'll see what we can do. But we'll figure something out there. And I don't know. I would prefer it to not be like super slapstick and completely comedy, because I think it's pretty cool to memorialize the tournament runs in a cool way and like really play up the epicness or whatever. So like my thinking was basically we would have dramatized versions of how certain matches in the series went. For example, VK7 would have taken the initiative in the early stages of the match by 7-pooling HitEmUp, and then after that, HitEmUp would have struck back one match, and then I think we were going to... he would have struck back in 2 matches and knocked him all the way back to impetus, and so the last match had been on Cold Sweat, and that means that, like, VK7 had been driven to like a territory that he had previously shaped, but then he had to be driven all the way back to Impetus, the platform, right? Which that Impetus is made out of, because VK7 made Cold Sweat and Impetus, right? So like that's the kind of cool subtext there that Vik would be being beaten back to his home territory and then ultimately cornered and destroyed. And then that would be like a cool story, an exciting story that we could tell. And so I'm sure we can make a way to do that, even though like there's always like the easy way out, I think, for any community-driven content is to make it comedic. And that's not to say I won't be doing comedic community-driven content in the future, or maybe even as part of this mission pack, but I would also love to have an opportunity for like, oh, do you want to be like super serious epic? Do you want to be like, like sure, true to your character, and maybe there would be some funny things, but it would be more, I guess, like film comedy and less like, slapstick or gag or parody type humor. And so like it would still be within, it would be what's the term? Diegetic, humor, right? And so it's like, it's funny because it's funny, not because it's like making fun of the whole thing or whatever. So it's not turning it into a farce, is like another way to put it. And so that's probably what we're going to be doing there. But I also wanted to use this opportunity to just let you guys know that factions are being developed as a result of the Tyrant Style mission pack, because every player has selected a faction. And so HitEmUp will be playing as the Futurist Terrans, the Futurist Federation. Mystery Meat, second place for Terran was Top Ramen. Obviously, Top Ramen selected the Nidus Trinity. We'll be developing that faction. Mystery Meat selected the Hikaton Coalition, and Hamster selected the Golden Republic. So those 4 factions will receive some development as a result of that. The Protoss factions that were selected were the Starbound by Neblime and the Kalendric Knights by Arbuz Budesh. So those 2 factions will be receiving some development as a result of that. And then we had Zerg factions. The Shambler selected the... I forget what the Gezirith Tendril. I was trying to remember if that was that or Cody, but it was the Gezirith Tendril. So we're going to see some development in there. And Veek7 has selected, of course, the Imicrenia Tendril, because that's the Infestation Tendril. So I allowed whoever placed deepest in the tournament as a given race, they were the ones who received the first pick, so to speak. And thankfully, we didn't have any like cases where 2 Zergs or 2 Terrans or 2 Protosses exited in the same place, because then I would have been like, coin flip to decide like who gets what. And so that still would have been fine, but obviously we didn't do any tiebreakers in that sense. So, all right, that's pretty much it. So I think we can move on to the community roundup. GG, boys. As we begin the community roundup for this episode of Pr0totype, I wanted to mention that there is a special set of thanks that go out to, again, our shills, HitEmUp, Bariso, Luciferius, Luciferius being the one who's been the longest lasting, and Bariso who's been quite active lately, as far as that is concerned, making videos and all sorts of cool shit. I will be very excitedly, welcoming new people to the server and to the community, courtesy of what these people have been doing, so appreciate that. And a warm welcome to new community members who have actually engaged in some recent conversations or watched streams or checked the project out. Cannoli and Cap'n Sugar and Julio Morgan. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully that is a good time. We also have plenty of opportunity here for some new people to show up, courtesy of the tournament that we're about to start in about a month's time. So I'm excited to welcome new people in, maybe in the next episode of Pr0totype. You never know how soon they'll start bursting down the doors. But for now, that is pretty much all I have for you. As there was one map that was made recently that I think is worth showing up there and pointing out. And that, of course, is none other than Three Crow's own map. It's the 300, remade in Cosmonarchy, now available in our UMS section. It is exactly what it looks like. It is up to 6-player co-op. You'll split the number of Harakans commingled within all of that. You'll also have some shamans, and the red Maverick graphic in the middle underneath the white start location is none other than Ahmed himself. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. I actually don't know what the Maverick graphics are over here. I think they might be some kind. Oh, they're ant seals. I'm pretty sure, because ant seals are an extended unit as well. So any extended unit looks like a Maverick in the what do you call it, in the context of SCM draft. That's just because we can't, unfortunately, have changes to the editor that allow it to recognize our expanded data limits. But whatever. I've only been asking for source code for SCM draft for about 10 years now. So, all right. So that's basically it. I just wanted to show that map off because congrats to 3Crow for making that happen. Do appreciate it, homie. So it's now time to do the coffee questions. In the link in the bottom left, you will find an opportunity to donate to project development and to prize pools and whatever else you want to donate towards bountying certain things that get added to the game, etc. We are moving on with the show and getting into that part where I give back to you, the donators, who are keeping Cosmonarchy alive. Thank you for your contributions. We are kicking things off first with Three Crow's question. Three Crow has a Xibalba-themed question. We're actually starting and ending our coffee question section with Xibalba-themed stuff, so I'm appreciative of that. Three Crow's question is, if you had to create a fighting game based on the Xibalba universe, how would you incorporate a fighter to represent each regency, and what would their signature technique and finishing moves be? Well, I have not really played that many fighting games, so I don't really know if signature technique and finishing moves are anything specific. I imagine finishing moves is kind of like the fatality things that you can do in Mortal Kombat, but I could be wrong about that. And signature technique, I don't really know. I mean, like, I guess I can break this down to like what would the fighting style be, and how would that differ between them. So first things first, since there are 20 regencies within Xibalba, it's a little bit difficult to, in the time span allotted for a single question, to answer in super great detail. But in some ways I almost don't have to, because there are some factions or some regencies, as we're calling them, which is basically like the catch-all term for, because you wouldn't say races because it's technically inaccurate. There are some things that are not a biological organism, therefore you can't really use race for that. And there are some things that are many races in one, like under one, many species under one umbrella, one roof for that. So that's why we call them regencies. And I think that's a better term than factions, especially since factions kind of makes you think, at least makes me think of things like Kane's Wrath or indeed Cosmonarchy, where you have like sub-factions, right, within a faction. So anyway, that's why we call them that. There is a funny term for this in RTS games, by the way. In Warlords Battlecry, they call them sides. I find that so funny of a term for it, you know what I mean? But anyway, I figured I would throw that out there as another, just to shout out Warlords Battlecry one time, But yeah, the Ansifi, the Keltar, and I guess there's probably at least one other race that would fit this bill, but I'm looking through and I'm wondering. I guess we'll throw the HitEmUp in there as well. These three regencies within Xibalba have very powerful physical forms, and I think the way that I would describe that is like the Ansifi is a bit more nimble than the Keltar in terms of their speed and agility and like their ability to like respond. They have faster reaction times probably. The Keltar is more sturdy, and the HitEmUp would use probably be a little bit less powerful when it comes to speed and when it comes to sturdiness than the Ansifi and the Keltar. Not HitEmUp. I'm thinking Githrovan. They both start with G. Okay, HitEmUp is the super consciousness. So the Githrovan would be the other one there. Githrovan would use less in the realm of speed and what would you call it? Like durability, and more in the realm of using psionics, some kind of psychic power to get the edge, be that displacement or, firing some kind of ranged attack, right? So, yeah, my fighting game experience is very much limited to, I played Tekken, I don't remember what it was, maybe 3, a lot when I was at the Boys and Girls Club in my local state, and I played a little bit of one of the semi-recent Mortal Kombats, probably like 8. I played a little bit of that on console with my brother a long time ago, like years ago. So it's not really that recent, I guess, but that's like probably the most recent experience I've had with a fighting game. So I'm not an expert in that kind of game. I recognize that some of them are really skilled. I'm mostly thinking of like Smash Melee when I think of that, actually. I don't really know that much about like the Tekken games as far as the skill cap goes, but apparently they're pretty big in terms of their skill cap, so that's pretty cool. They seem like there's a lot of overlap in terms of the style of game, or style of competition. When you're thinking of like Brood War compared to a fighting game, there seems like a lot of overlap there. So it's something I would imagine I have like a solid affinity for. But when it comes to dealing with things like actually designing the game, I have no idea what I'm doing with that. So I don't know, for example, if it's a requirement that every fighting game character has a ranged attack. But if it wasn't, then I would say that the Githrovans could stand out by having a ranged attack to their fighter. And that would be one of the ways in which it is able to keep distance, right? Or maybe instead of it being a damaging attack, it might like slow things down, right? To give them a little bit of a benefit, or something like that. Or maybe it would be like a charge up thing where the Githrovan would have some way to endow itself with greater power, or some setup that they would have to do to get some other move going. and like it would be something that you could deal with as the other regencies. Like maybe the Githrovan would summon some kind of source of psychic energy, which could then be separately attacked by the other target, and so you'd be splitting the focus of your enemy by doing that. And if you were able to protect that asset, it would be something where they would have to suddenly you would have the benefit, right? And so it would be like kind of like if the Cyclops for the Terran arsenal in Cosmonarchy. It shoots and then it releases this projectile thing or this effect field thing that damages units 2 seconds later. It would almost be like that, where the Githrovan would summon something, or like, when you place a mine as a Terran with the vultures, you're doing something and then seconds later it's kicking into effect or becoming armed. And then that would be a case where like you could imagine the Githrovans doing that with one of their techniques that would then empower them, but could be interrupted or could be maybe avoided. Like maybe instead of destroying whatever this font of energy that the Githrovan has summoned, you can't attack it, but you can see what they're setting up for, and therefore you can maybe get yourself ready to dodge or block or whatever the thing is that allows you to avoid it for counterplay. So I think the Githrovans would probably set themselves up for success. That's what the Githrovan fighter would be like. It would be a lot of setup like that. Whereas the Ansifi would be more, it would have maybe tighter hit recoveries, maybe opportunities for like dodging if you can anticipate your opponent and reacting. Like again, emphasizing the fact that they have very, very fast reaction times. The Kaltar would be more about trying to lead, like imagine you're playing Halo PC and you're trying to lead the enemy by several paces with a rocket or with your regular fire because of bad netcode. That's kind of like what I imagine the Kaltar would be trying to set up for, is like, can I anticipate where you're going to be when I am, releasing this attack? And that would be a pretty cool mind game thing of like, oh, he hit him with a heavy attack, and the only way he could have done that is if he expected him to be in that location, right? And then so there would have to be some ambiguity to their animation as a result, because otherwise you would just know based on something about the animation which angle it's going to go in. So that would be an interesting line to go for. I would say for the Ember Seat, it's kind of a difficult one. Maybe one of the things that the Ember Seat would be pretty cool with is if like, this would probably fuck with the rules of fighting games too much, but I would imagine it would be really cool if the Ember Seat could be like, you start off with like the Otini fighter, and it gets, when that gets dismantled, the Skozi fighter steps in, or the Reeton fighter steps in, and then when those get dismantled, it goes up the chain, right? Like, I like that idea a lot, actually. I think that would be really cool. Then you go to Perilli, and then eventually you end up with the Totarans, and like, that's like an example, right, of like how that way you would have full distribution, or maybe it would be more like you play as, the Reeton, like you're a Reeton fighter, but you can summon, you can tap in like the other ones or something at will, or you can set up to tap them in or something like that. I don't know, like some way to show that there's some cooperation between them. It's not just like when one of them dies, the other one steps in, but that would be the simplest way of implementing that, so that everybody gets their style going. And so if it was something that you were opting into, it would almost be like trying to equip something in the middle of also trying, like, like equipping a piece of material or whatever. You're trying to like delay your enemy's disruption of that. And so you're trying to scale up to some other thing or whatever. That could be an interesting angle. The Makral Das would, the problem with the Makral Das idea is that a lot of them are centered around mind control, and that doesn't really work in a fighting game. You're not supposed to just be able to like mind control your enemy and then deny them access to their character for a while. Obviously, any stuns or whatever are really annoying when you only have one character, right? As playing League of Legends in any era will show you. But when it comes to the Makral Das, I would think at the very least they would try to make use of the Dakret, the ability for them to manipulate using telekinetic powers, the scrap materials and stuff. So the Makral Das fighter would be like it would be a Makralon inside a Warmech that, like a Dakret type of exoskeleton, if you will, exosuit, that when damaged, pieces of it would break off and then be able to be used for additional moves. So there's basically like certain things that only unlock for the Makralon fighter as the, I guess exterior or whatever takes more damage. And I guess maybe you could imagine that ultimate techniques would only be possible if the Macrolon was removed from, like, if the mech suit entirely deteriorated and could no longer be animated at all, then it's just the Macrolon and they don't breathe very well, so your time is ticking at that point, and so that could be kind of interesting too. Where it would basically be like you could see the exosuit as a resource unto itself, which absorbs damage, but you could maybe try to bypass that as the opponent player. If you could be precise with your strikes, you could deal damage directly to the Macrolon entity within it. And that would be like, basically the fighting game equivalent of a headshot, right? Is like, are you precise with your strikes, then you're dealing damage through it. Whereas if you're dealing damage to the exosuit, then you're, changing the stakes of things. I would do a lot of dynamic shit like that, I think. And then, of course, there'd be some kind of finishing move technique or whatever that would allow the Macrodas would summon a Dossier, and the Dossier would begin eating the enemy or something like that, right? Then you still get to flex the Dossier part of it, so it's a genuine Macrodas fighter and not just a Macrolon fighter. But I'm thinking about like the finishing moves for the other ones. The Keltar would definitely I think the Keltar would probably have some kind of warrior feast thing, like maybe it would just like the mythological, or not mythological, this really did happen, so it's not really mythological, but as far as we can tell, this happened. The warrior cultures of humans past would kill an enemy warrior and then eat his heart for his courage or whatever. Like, there's stories about that happening all the time. So it's like kind of accepted fact that did happen, whether or not it actually did. People just assume that it did. And so we could draw upon that for the purposes of saying, like, here's, the Keltar, like, tears off your, tears your heart out of your socket or whatever and then eats it. That wouldn't work with everything, because you're talking about, like, oh, there's the Roselium fighter. I don't know what the fuck that would look like. But that could be what the Keltar does to the organics. And then for the Roselium, maybe it still rips out the heart, but or like the control unit, the central control unit, and looks at it and then kind of like throws it away in disgust, like it's not useful anymore. That could be a cool move for the Keltar. So there'd be some context, right? And then I don't know about the Ember Seat one, because it would obviously have to be like a different finisher depending, or maybe it could like all of the Ember Seat member nations, their requisite fighters could arrive all at the same time and do some kind of I'm blanking on the reference I was going to make there. I think it was something about the Captain Planet, but it'd be something like that where they like put their power together and defeat you all at once or whatever, something like that could be pretty cool. I guess the Ansifi one would probably just be like, because the Ansifi use mechanized power armor as well a lot of the time, and so I definitely think the Ansifis would be that way. The Ansifi fighter would have a mechanized power armor of some kind, and so I could imagine like the sort of like how the Iron Man Hulkbuster armor in, I think it was the first Avengers movie, but I can't remember. Maybe it was the second one. I honestly don't remember. All that cape shit just like mixes into your head eventually. But he like has a thing with the Hulkbuster armor that punches Hulk in the face like over and over again. And you could do something like that where like the power armor somehow pummels you to death. That could be a move. I don't know if I would go into the gratuitous like gory violence option that a lot of fighters do. I think it would have to be rule of cool stuff without needing to go into that, because I think that's more of a Mortal Kombat realm anyway, right? So I don't think we need to rip people's spleens out. I think the goriest stuff you'd probably get is what the Keltar were doing, where they feast upon the heart or whatever. And then, I'm thinking about the Psychora fighter. The Psychora fighter would try to like evade a lot of damage. They wouldn't have a great amount of health in terms of their health pool. They'd probably be pretty skill capped in terms of like a higher like hard to master that one, and not necessarily hard to learn. Not necessarily easy to learn either. I think they'd probably be pretty complicated. But they would. I'd want to reference the extra dimension somehow. I don't know if that means like you could. As like a cheeky way to reference that, they could come further closer to the camera or further away from the camera, and as a way to completely dodge attacks. Like that would be like the visual representation of it when they successfully do a dodge. And I think that would, when they do so, they would be dipping into the extra dimension and thus come back empowered, so that they would maybe deal more damage after a successful dodge. So they would definitely be reliant on that kind of thing. And I guess I was thinking of their finisher. I mean, they're all about like the ability to basically quote unquote delete terrain. That was one of the ideas that I had planned for that Regency. And so I think it stands to reason the Psychora could probably just like open up open up reality around you, and you would just fall into nothingness or be deleted like the terrain was. And so you would just cease existing, which would be pretty fucking cosmic horror, you know, but gruesome in its own way, I guess, from a psychological standpoint. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much what I would do for the Psychora. So I think I've mostly covered that for the retail regencies. If 3Crow is interested in what would happen for the other ones, he can go ahead and, I guess, re-ask this question. But I think that's where we'll leave it for now because, you know, based on the length of time spent answering that question, you could tell what I was talking about like, oh yeah, 20 regencies later, we're going to be here for another 30 minutes or whatever. So there you have it. That's what I would do for that. I have no idea if it would be any good. It sounds cool. That's all I can tell you. Up next is a more like status update for you guys because HitEmUp has used his money and his question to ask, how is progress on the iscript extender? He also adds that he desperately wants to play with the Tier 3 Sniper Protoss unit that Veek7 actually pitched to me, and we'll have to see about how we want to do that. Because he was like, yeah, so it should just deal 100 damage. And I was like, what? But you know what? Maybe it will. We'll see. All I can tell you is we'll see. We'll find out. So the iscript extender did make some nice progress recently where we got the program to compile, and I think we actually launched the game with the iscript. So the only problem right now is figuring out how to make sure that the parser is working fully. So for those who don't know, the iscript is basically, it stands for image script. I'm pretty sure is what the I is supposed to be there, since it only runs for all images in the game. And an image is like it's fine to just say that it's anything that you see on the game that isn't like terrain, but it's probably, there's like a more specific definition I could probably come up with that would be more useful. But like units have an image, right? And then projectiles like bullets have an image, and then doodads have an image associated with them that's not related to the actual terrain layer of the game. And there's a couple of other things too. So like technically the selection circles are an image, and the HP bars are, I believe they might technically also be in that same layer, but they're done in a different way. A lot of what rendering is done in Brood War is like really weird compared to now, because obviously it's been so long since it came out. But anyway, iscript is essentially the language that controls which animations play at any given time for units. And so, and also for those like doodad images and stuff, if you have like an animated doodad, like the desert tiles that have like those doodads with the flashing lights on the side of the building, or like the doodads like the spinning fans on the installation tile set, stuff like that. Basically, all of that is run through iscript. And so the reason why I am why we need to extend it is because without having unique instructions, we don't have enough room for any further unique instructions, basically. And without adding more unique instructions to the game, we can't tell unit graphics, for example, like if we were to try to make a new unit and we were at the iscript limit, then we wouldn't be able to, for example, tell it to use the shadow of a of like whatever its shadow is, right? We wouldn't be able to just say, hey, use that as the shadow, because we have to tell it to do so inside iscript. And so that's like one example of something that's very specific, but also very basic. If your shadow doesn't match up, it's going to be really wonky. And then there's like things like the sounds that get played when a unit attacks, or when a unit goes for a, say like they go through a borrow animation. That's all done through iscript. So there's some things that you can make as optimizations, and many things we already have, where we've basically said, oh, this borrow animation is, for example, the same as the other borrow animation. So we'll just call the same block of code so that we don't have to duplicate it. And that's like one example, right? We've done that a lot in a lot of different places, and we're still bunching up against that limit. I think technically we might be able to add 1 or 2 more units or something, because I've made some additional optimizations semi-recently. But we can't add like, a whole nother race. We can't add a whole nother, set of faction stuff or whatever, like not reasonably, not feasibly right now. And so that's what the iscript extender is going to allow us to do. It's going to allow many more units. It's going to allow us to add, obviously, the Escozi and maybe other races in the future if we want to. There's a lot of things that are kind of reliant on that if we want to continue down that road, and we do. And so the iscript extender is continuing to march along, and we had to basically implement from the first part a parser that would take our text file that's full of iscript and parse it into instructions that the game can understand. And that kind of code was never written before. So we collaborated with X405, has been a sort of, you could call him like I don't know if part-time is the right term, because he's on for like a month and then he's gone for a few months and then he comes back. So he's an occasional contributor to the program, to the game, and very helpful there. Definitely a man he's kind of made it his pet project to try to work on a lot of re-implementing and reverse engineering for StarCraft 1. And so he's been instrumental in a lot of the acquisition of many different technical feats. And so that is one of them. And so he has definitely helped us out quite a bit there. He left us some instructions to do. And Veek7 and I refamiliarized ourselves with the iscript work very recently, like within the last week, so that we could get a little bit more progress made on it. And so we have a little bit of a to-do. And definitely something that we are all motivated to continue working on, particularly since we've reached a conclusion that, like, wow, it would be really awesome to have more races. And obviously there's some units that still need to be added as well. And so, yeah, I'm very, I can't really tell you like exactly what a timeline would look like as far as when it was going to be done. We thought it would already be done several times, going back as far as like last year at one point. So it was definitely pretty significant as far as like how much effort was actually required. Thanks to X405, we found out about additional things we had to do, but it still took additional effort, right? And so like, that's one of those cases where I think of the invisible progress bar. There's a progress bar and you can see that it goes so far, but as you get further closer to what you think is the end of that progress bar, you realize the progress bar goes on quite a bit more. And I didn't realize that until I, found out more details or whatever. And so that's the kind of thing that we have. It's like the same deal with like trying to resolve desyncs and replay issues and stuff. I did just recently fix a months long bug that, crashes when you have a player leave, but only sometimes. So that's really good to fix that. That's now fixed on pre-release and eventually will be pushed to release. So very pleased with how that one is going to work out. Very nice. But beyond that, there's still a couple of other issues. There's things like the replays don't work sometimes and everything else. So they have been getting seemingly more stable. That's good. But we will continue to resolve things as they come up as we can. And the iscript extender has been focused on. We're basically like, what I'm going to try to do for anything that's big like those kinds of tasks is dedicate a significant chunk of like one day out of the week so that I can work with, in this case, I have to work with Veek about it. So it's kind of down to his schedule. And also this coming week, we want to record a crow's nest. So there's that as well. But there you go. Some updates on the iscript extender. I cannot promise any time frame for it exactly, but hopefully there will be significant progress on it to the point where we have the first couple of extended units, extended iscript stuff written out, by the time Acropolis 2 starts. I can say that like within a month, we can hopefully be starting to use it and really putting it through its paces as well. So that is the answer to that question. Up next, we have the Shambler. He asks, how would you write yourself into each of your settings? So he specifically says, if you had to write yourself as a prominent character into each of your settings, how would you do it in a tasteful way that can still be recognized as you? So I'm interpreting this question as, who would I be? Who would I most likely be when it comes to, like, if I existed within one of these worlds? And specifically had to be a player in the context of, like, a major player or significant player in the context of, like, a military campaign. So if I was in Cosmonarchy's world, the Chrysilian sector, if I was in Pagan's world, if I was in, the world of, Pangea, if I was in the world of Onatar, if I was in the world of Xibalba, what kind of character would I be? And so I like to imagine that I am a Kolopoazos in all of the worlds, wink, but actually, so I'm not sure. I mean, if you think about the factions that exist for things like the different things, first I'm going to identify a faction that I would likely write myself as. I think a part of me is definitely idealistic, which lends me towards the idea of like maybe I would be Protoss, and yet at the same time, the most obvious thing to do would be to make me a human, like a Terran. I think I would, like, in a way, Anad Thyran is kind of a self-insert. It's not really, like, it's not me, but there's a lot of me in that character. It's got a different accent, so it's not something that maybe people would immediately think. I'd probably do that, by the way. I would probably change the voice, like make it so that the voice is significantly different than my normal voice, no matter what. Because even if it is a self-insert or whatever, that's one way to make it so that it's not. It feels a little bit more grounded. Is if if you can't identify the character as having a similar voice, then it's just one extra layer in between the audience and the self-insert part of it being like, oh, that's just the author, right? I would definitely not make myself infallible no matter what. Anad Thyron has flaws. They might not be immediately visible in Anad's Greatsword, which is the map that he features in, that I did for Mapcrap earlier this year. But he's definitely a guy with some flaws, and the same is true for all of the characters that I make in general, because I think flaws are not the only thing that make you interesting, but like the contrast between your flaws and your strengths and your ideals and all of those things are really what butters the bread, in my opinion. And so when it comes to, I would say like my answer there would be Arthur Mazakel, or Anad Thyron. Either one of those would be pretty solid characters for me to pick from. Arthur Mazakel hasn't actually debuted yet, but he is of the Hekaton Coalition. And so I like to imagine, the idea being that you're trying to lead your people to better times. You're under the pump when it comes to the current times, and you have to immediately problem solve. Like that's a compelling thing for me. If Arthur Mazakel of the Hekaton Coalition is coming into the Crescilian sector after a failed war against, the Imacrenia Tendril, then like that's one of those situations where you're like, okay, I've seen some horrifying stuff. If I'm Arthur Mazakel, I've seen some horrifying stuff, but I have endured. I have decided to continue. There's no choice. Like a lot of lives are counting on me. The mantle of command, or the power, the responsibility. It is crushing at times, and yet I don't even get to be stressed out about that per se. I need to work to help save my people. That's what I need to do. And so that is an attractive position, not in the sense of like, oh, I really hope that happens in real life. Obviously not. But were I to be in that situation, I would find that to be an attractive position in the context of like, I have the opportunity to prove that I can do this and do good where other people might fail. And I might fail too, but I have an opportunity to not fail. And I would say that's probably like a common thing you would see in any character that I heavily identify with, is being in a situation that is indubitably not a good situation, where rife with the prospect of potential failure. And if failure happens, it is enormously consequential. You're talking many lives lost and just utter disaster, catastrophe, maybe the fate of like your entire nation, let alone your whole family and your close ones and your brotherhood or whatever. Like all of that stuff would be on the line, right? And yet you power through, you persevere, you face the challenges and come out the other side, or not. Well, either way, you give it your all to see what happens. That to me is kind of like measure of a man type talk. And that is always going to be something that I vibe with a lot. And so I would say Anad Thyron is more like on the other side of that. He's already made his, significant, he's had his time, doing that kind of thing. And Arthur Mazakel is in the moment of that. And so I would say those two characters are like attractive to me as like potentially, if I had to be a character, that might be somebody I would be. And I know that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, because that's a character that's already been written. But there is a lot of me in those characters. And so I guess I would throw that in there. Because some characters I write and I don't vibe with them at all. They're not. I mean, I guess that's not really true, because I think there's something something interesting about all of the characters that I write. But I would say there's a lot of characters I've written that I don't want to have in my orbit of friends. I don't want to be, associated with them. They're fucking crazy people, but, or they're like just, immoral or something. But interesting still, for sure. But those characters are characters where I can relate to what they are going through, even though I haven't been through that. I can imagine it. I can empathize with it. But then I can say, well, good on them. They're giving it their all. I aspire to be that way. And so hopefully that kind of gets the point across. And there's not really like a faction in Pagan that has like all of the answers, or like there's in Pangea, the factions that exist are like, there's at least one faction. There's definitely one faction there that's like, quote unquote good, or like, it has a good nature associated with it. And yet the thing that I would say about that is that they are still kind of like they have allowed the universe to get this way, but through inaction, through complacency, through adherence to a certain ideology that results in people not actively, policing for, like, the live and let live kind of philosophy, where you actively allow negative things to occur because it's not your purview to do anything about it. Which is not to say I'm advocating for world police or whatever. I'm just saying, like, that's the kind of thing that happened, right? Like, the world continued to descend. The world around them descended. They did not come along for that ride, but they certainly didn't try to find the brakes. They just disengaged. And that's kind of what Alexstrandus and in Pagan did, is Alexstrandus are like, oh, the world, the planet is absolutely fucking disastrous. Let's go into orbit. They've got, let's just exist as orbital cities. You know what I mean? Like, let's do that. And that's a cool idea from what would you say, a high concept idea, right? It's like, there's something compelling about that from a conceptual standpoint. But there's a similar thing there. And also Alexstrandus has a little bit of a perverse aspect to it that's beneath the surface, perhaps. They're a lot less, like, good-natured, maybe, than the Western chauvinists that you'll find in Pangea. So the Western chauvinists have allowed the universe to catapult into the brink of war and beyond, due to their inaction in part. And it got bad, and it would have been bad anyway, but it got worse because they didn't do anything. And Alexstrandus is kind of like the same thing in Pagan, except they're not all that good themselves. So, that's definitely a situation there. When it comes to, however, like, I would still say I would rather be of those factions than I would be of any other factions. So I'd rather be a part of Alexstrandus and be one of the good ones trying to fix the system, even though it's fucked. I would rather be one of those characters, one of those types of people. And I would rather be within the Western chauvinists, because we've got a lot of right ideas, by percentage of whose ideas are right. We've got a lot of them. We just might not be the most, capable of implementing them or capable of enacting them. And that's the fight that needs to happen more so than anything else. And so there is that for sure. And then when it comes to, Onatar, obviously you'd think I'm mankind. If you're part of Voiceless, then you've basically there's like a nihilistic return to monkey sentiment among the Voiceless in some ways, although it's not deliberate. It's just, that's what happened. And so you think about the Blood Summon, and they're a lot more like actually like the evils within us. You don't want to be part of those two. And Entropic is like a terrifying dystopian sci-fi future where there is no man anymore. And so obviously I'm team mankind all the way under that, circumstance. And when it comes to Xibalba, I guess I'll be a Kolopoazos, because then I get to shape, reality whatever way I want, right? Basically. So, but no, I'd probably be a Githrovan, I guess, because that's like there's no human there, so you can't really say like, oh, I'd be the human faction. There's not really anything like that. I'd prefer to be probably like a Githrovan character who's maybe been steeled a little bit in battle, so he knows he's not as idealistic and naive. Well, he's still idealistic, but not naive. That's the thing. You want to be idealistic. You want to have ideals. You just you don't want to be naive enough to. You want to be aware enough of your surroundings. You're insightful enough to know what's going on. So I'd say that about that situation. There you have it. So I can't really tell you that much more about who I'd be as a character within these contexts, but the Shambler, I hope you enjoyed the answer to your question. We've got one last one to answer, so let's get on to it. That about wraps us up, except for Myrian's question, who's coming up now. And Azos, Kolopoazos that is, has an idea to abduct a standard infantryman or rough equivalent from each race in the Xibalba setting. Then they would be put on a featureless world pitted against each other. Who would be the victor? So I'm not factoring in the Kolopoazos, but I guess even if I did, it might not change the answer to this too much. So the infantryman for the Ansifi, I'm not going to use like I guess I could use like the basic unit, right? The Ansifi infantry unit has like the ability to just kind of jump around and reconnoiter. There's that one, and then there's like the more the cadet type, the maverick type unit, right? Then there's the Emberseat. You'd probably think about the Retons for them. The Goon would probably be that one. For the Keltar, Oh man, I'm not sure which one you'd do for the Keltar either, because I'd love to do a melee one. I'm just not sure. Could you do Disciple or would you do Accomplice there? I wonder if, yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I would say that you'd probably do the Accomplice. Featureless world does mean, I guess that means you could A move, right? So the Disciple could just attack, but I don't think its speed would be able to keep up with some of the other things there. So I guess let's see, because I know he's not looking for Myrian's definitely not looking here for the context of like, oh, who's gonna win on the statistical side? He's asking for like the lore answer, right? So yeah, I'd probably say the other thing too is that this isn't like a boss rush thing. This is just like I put 20 units on a map and like, you know, essentially, and like they're all hostile to each other. Who wins? And a lot of that is going to depend on who's proximal to who. But I will say, what we're going to be on the lookout for is which regency has access to an infantryman with some self-sufficiency associated with it. That would be like the first thing that I would think of. And so when it comes to that, the question becomes like, okay, we got the Psychora. They've got some shielding associated with them, right? Then there's the, obviously the Keltar's kind of very stocky, but he doesn't have too much, does he? Okay, so there is all of that to consider. I'm going to guess that so let's go to the retail regencies first, right? So the retail regencies, Ansifi, Emberseat, Keltar, Githrovin, Makroldas, Psychora. The Ansifi and the Keltar and the Githrovins, those are going to be the ones with the most significantly, like, they're, of those retail regencies, they're the three that's like, their infantry units would be pretty deadly by themselves. The Emberseat ones are more about numbers. So you get one, you're not going to get that much. Makroldas, the dossiers are pretty easy to outmaneuver. The Psychora, they're pretty squishy. So they're not going to hold up in a straight-on fight. Psychora, maybe there's an outside chance you could like micro back for the shield regen or whatever, but they don't have flash shielding. So when it comes to the, not lingering on the mechanics question part of this, but just in general, like what's going on here. I'd say that's probably what I can say about that. So now when it comes to the Orlithray and the Rosellium, I don't know about that one. That's a situation where, like, again, Orlithray is like strength in numbers a lot with their basic units, and the same is actually true for the Rosellium. So I think they would end up being a slightly higher power, version of like what happens with the Makroldas, what happens with the Emberseat, and to a lesser extent the Psychora. Solar Throne and Oros, these are units these are ones that you got to watch out for because they will be technical units, more so than even like the Githrovin. So far I'm thinking, before we get to Solar Throne and Oros, I think the Githrovin one will win because the Githrovin one will have a mix of like the ability to have some kind of self-sustaining capabilities and like the power necessary to execute the enemies. So that would be my guess. In a total melee, like free-for-all, then you're talking about, they'd probably gang up on the Githrovin knowing about its technological capabilities, right? So I'm not sure that would actually happen. That's maybe the part of this question that's funny is that you could answer in many different ways depending on context. But the Solar Throne infantry unit would be capable of, would most likely be capable of like some kind of debuff, which is one of the things you got to watch out for. And the Oros would be capable of some kind of self-buff, which wouldn't be related to sustainability, but would give it like attack speed or movement speed, something like that. So then you've got the Rune and the Gadamemter. I don't think either of them are going to be too much of a threat. Gadamemter would deploy a basic kind of conscript type unit or what have you, so not as bad in terms of not as like reliant on other numbers as the Retons for the Emberseat, but definitely closer to that than maybe like the Githrovin or the Keltar unit. And the Rune, I guess, does have some rapid regeneration capabilities. So maybe the Rune could be a sleeper, but I think it wouldn't have the range advantage. So I think it would end up falling. The Bithrantir and the Nadarasatha, On paper, you shouldn't really have to worry too much about that. The Mithrantier would be a low damage, high durability unit, so it probably wouldn't be able to overwhelm the enemy. The Nadarasatha will be... The basic infantry equivalent there would be like... I feel like the Nadarasatha would be more about, like splash damage, maybe even unsafe splash. So not very useful in a one-on-one fight. So I think it would also end up falling. The Katithron would be perhaps the most powerful in terms of like durability that we've seen so far. And its durability would be conditional on like facing your target, which is something you're definitely going to do in a one-on-one. The Kolopoazos, if they're throwing themselves into the mix, they do have a gap close. So it's sort of like the Kabbalist with the decloak thing where they teleport and then they decloak. Something similar to that is going to be true for the Kolopoazos. So they can do some damage, but I don't think that they'll sustain enough beating. I will say that they're probably ranked number 3 or 4 in this list. And then the Dalventhos, the Omindris, we're talking... so the Omindris one would be easily outmaneuvered, but if you didn't like micro out of its attack, I think it would probably deal a lot of damage to you. So that one's kind of a hard one to call. I would say in a desperate fight, you'd have to really put a lot of bullets into it. Then the Dalventhos is like... I feel like the Dalventhos is probably comparable to the Ansifi, so not ridiculously powerful. And for the Thruk and the Avot one, I'm torn between whether or not you would want to throw in the unstable form, or if you would want to throw the stable form that you get access to in the early stages. But the unstable one is not very useful. It's not very useful that it's unstable, I should say. It's a little bit energized, right? So it's like, it's faster. Again, you read the Oros for that one, right? Like it's like, or think of the Oros there. But speed isn't everything, and they're eventually going to go critical. So at that point, they start taking self-damage, and then they blow up. So not very ideal for like a one-on-one fight, right? More for crowd control. And more for like other units, right? And then for the Thruk, it's like slow-moving, easy to outmaneuver. It can stealth, I guess. There's one that's going to be able to kind of pseudo-stealth, and then there's going to be one that's more on the side of like standing still and disabling its attack to basically stunning itself to heal. But I don't know if it would out-heal the damage from all of the others. So I don't think the Thruk would win either. So yeah, I'm going to say... I think it'll end up being I still think maybe the Githrovin is like the safest bet. The Solar Throne can debuff. So I guess it's like Githrovin, then Solar Throne, then Oros, and then Kolopoazos, right? And so like those are the 4 that I would say is like most likely ones to end up being the victors. And, the Kolopoazos are setting the stakes, so maybe they are the ones who do it. So there you go. That's the answer to the question. Hopefully some interesting little nuggets of info gleaned from that, and also from Shambler's question, of course. There's like this thing going on behind the scenes where some of the community members who are really excited about the custom worlds that I've been building, like the original worlds that I've been making and designing, will ask me questions about them, and that's very cool. It's gratifying for me as the author. But it's funny too that that's how they also get a lot of the information that they have because the games aren't done yet, right? So I don't know, it's kind of interesting there. With that being said, we will be jumping into the show outro now. That is where we close out the show. I'm very excited about the future of Cosmonarchy. I hope you guys are too. It's going to be a great time to be a part of the project and and just enjoy each other's time when it comes to that sort of thing. And I very much am looking forward to when we get to see the future of the RTS in action on the big screen when it comes to these big tournaments and stuff. Stay tuned for more castovers. Oh, and a little note on the video scheduling. Every day we're going to be doing a castover except for Sunday. Sunday will be when Pr0totype releases. So that's what we're going to try going forward. Maybe I'll do a Sunday show match or something. We'll see. But for now, we're going to do 6 castovers a week. So this is what you get instead of the castover on that 7th day, on that Sabbath. Rest yourself, weary head. And GG's.